family group chat. She'll always be broke. I made it my bio with 2 million followers. It's funny how 4 little words typed out by my sister Megan and sent into the digital echo chamber of our family became the fuel for my entire life. I remember the exact moment I saw it. I was sitting on the floor of my tiny studio apartment in Detroit, surrounded by packing boxes. I had just quit my stable, soul-crushing graphic design job at a corporate firm where my daily highlight was choosing which shade of gray to use for a pie chart. I'd decided to go all in on my art, my digital creations, the vibrant worlds I built on my tablet that felt more real to me than my own life. They left me with packing boxes and a family chat message, "She'll always be broke." I turned their doubt into millions with my art. Subscribe and like to see how my digital worlds conquered their doubts. I had sent a hopeful message to the group chat, a picture of my packed boxes with the caption, "Here's to new beginnings." The response was a wave of concerned face emojis from aunts and uncles, followed by a long lecturing paragraph from my brother-in-law, Paul. He wrote about market volatility and the importance of a 401k and how creative pursuits are hobbies, not careers. He was a senior vice president at some bank and spoke like a walking press release. My sister Megan, his perfectly manicured wife, had simply replied with a heart emoji to his message. But then, a few minutes later, a new message popped up. I think she meant to send it to Paul privately. It was just 4 words. "She'll always be broke." My phone felt cold in my hand. It wasn't a shock, not really. It was just a confirmation of what I always felt in their presence. I was the dreamer, the artsy one, the family project. Megan was the success story. She married Paul, moved into a 5-bedroom house in a gated community, and spent her days picking out granite countertops. My success was measured in paint smudges on my jeans. Hers was measured in the carat size of her diamond earrings. I didn't delete the message. I didn't leave the group chat. I took a screenshot. Then I went to my fledgling Instagram profile, which had maybe 300 followers at the time, and I typed those 4 words into my bio. "She'll always be broke." It felt like claiming a scar. That was 3 years ago. Now those 2 million followers weren't just a number. They were a community. They were people who bought my digital prints, signed up for my online courses, and commissioned pieces that now hung in homes from New York to Los Angeles. I wasn't just an artist anymore. I was a brand. My tiny studio apartment was now a spacious loft downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows. The view was no longer a brick wall but the city skyline. And I hadn't eaten instant noodles out of financial necessity in a very, very long time. My grandfather Arthur, who was the only one who ever understood my creative spirit, used to tell me something before he passed away. He'd watch me sketch for hours in my notebook and say, "If they don't see your worth, build a world where they have to pay to get in." I didn't understand it fully then, but I understood it now. I had built my own world. My family, of course, remained blissfully ignorant. To them, Instagram was a place for photos of brunch and babies. They didn't understand analytics or engagement rates or 6-figure brand deals. In their minds, I was still just Ashley, playing with her crayons in a dusty apartment, probably racking up credit card debt. They still sent me links to entry-level administrative jobs and gift cards for grocery stores on my birthday. The condescension was a constant, low hum in the background of my life. I let them believe it. I never posted about my income, my new loft, or the trips I took. My feed was just my art. Vibrant, bold, and full of life. The opposite of the world they lived in. I was playing a long game, a game they didn't even know they were a part of. The silence from my end was, I think, more infuriating to them than any argument would have been. Paul would occasionally post in the group chat about his latest promotion or a picture of his new BMW, clearly directed at me. "Hard work pays off," he'd caption it. Megan would post photos from their vacations in Italy or Greece, always with a passive-aggressive hashtag like "Whiters blessed" or "Hot Trim Hustle Hard." I never reacted. I just kept working, kept creating, kept building. My revenge wasn't going to be a screaming match over Thanksgiving dinner. It was going to be quiet, elegant, and undeniable. It was going to be a spectacle they couldn't ignore. And I knew the perfect stage for it. The annual charity gala their country club hosted was coming up. It was the biggest social event of the year in their little bubble, a place to see and be seen. a place where worth was measured by the name on your table sponsorship. They had no idea that this year, the main event sponsor, the one whose name would be on every banner and program, was a new, mysterious art collective that had donated a record-breaking amount. A collective I had founded a month ago. They didn't know they were about to walk into my world, a world they would have to pay to get into. The week before the gala was a blur of logistics. I was on a Zoom call with the event coordinator, a woman named Carol who had the brisk efficiency of a military general. On my second monitor, I had the layout of the grand ballroom at the Oakwood Country Club, a place I'd only ever seen from the outside. We were finalizing the details of the sponsorship package from the Vibrant Canvas Collective, the official name I'd given my shell corporation. It sounded just artsy and vague enough to be believable. "So the $200,000 donation is confirmed?" Carol said, ticking something off a list on her screen. "That covers the main hall sponsorship, the champagne toast, and the headline entertainment. For the main auction prize, the collective is donating a piece titled Genesis." "That's right," I confirmed, keeping my voice level. Genesis was my most celebrated work, a swirling digital landscape that had taken me 6 months to create. A print of it had recently sold at a New York gallery for a price that would have paid off Paul and Megan's mortgage twice over. They, of course, had no idea. "Wonderful. Your name, or the collective's name, will be on everything, Ashley. The banners at the entrance, the front page of the program, the projections on the walls." My phone buzzed on the desk beside me. It was the family group chat. I ignored it, focusing on Carol. "That's the idea," I said. "We want to make an impact." She smiled. "Well, you certainly have. This is the largest single donation in the gala's history." The phone buzzed again, insistently this time. I excused myself for a moment, glancing at the screen. It was a picture from Paul. He was standing next to his BMW, holding up a bottle of champagne that probably cost more than my first month's rent in Detroit. The caption read, "Celebrating a record-breaking quarter. Hard work always pays off. Grind our success." I felt a familiar, dull ache. It wasn't jealousy, but a kind of second-hand embarrassment for his complete lack of self-awareness. A few seconds later, a message from Megan appeared below it. "So proud of my amazing husband. All his hard work is so inspiring." Then, a direct reply to me, as if she just remembered I existed. "Sweetie, I saw this and thought of you. The law firm my friend works at is hiring a receptionist. It's not much, but it's stable and has benefits. Just trying to help." She'd attached a link to a job posting. I clicked it. The salary was $45,000 a year. I looked from the job posting on my phone to the gala budget on my monitor. My donation alone was more than 4 times that annual salary. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. They were living in their black and white world of spreadsheets and quarterly reports, while I was painting a new reality in full, vibrant color. They saw a receptionist job as a step up for me. They still saw the girl eating instant noodles on the floor of a tiny apartment. I didn't reply. My silence in that group chat had become a canvas of its own, one where they could paint whatever picture of me they needed to believe in. The struggling artist, the cautionary tale, the poor little sister who needed saving. "Everything okay, Ashley?" Carol's voice brought me back. I took a slow breath and closed the group chat. I picked up my tablet and pulled up the final design for the banners that would hang at the entrance to the gala. In elegant, swirling font, it read, "The Oakwood Annual Charity Gala, proudly sponsored by the Vibrant Canvas Collective." "Everything is perfect, Carol," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "Let's talk about the lighting. I want the entire room to feel like you're stepping inside a painting." As we discussed color palettes and light projections, I thought about my grandfather Arthur's words again. "If they don't see your worth, build a world where they have to pay to get in." The gala wasn't just a party. It was the grand opening of my world. Megan and Paul had their tickets, of course. They'd probably paid a few $100s for them, feeling smug and charitable. They had no idea they were about to be guests in a house that I had built, brick by digital brick. They thought they were going to their country club. They were actually walking onto my stage, and the price of admission was going to be their pride. The show was about to begin, and they were the unsuspecting stars. The night of the gala arrived under a sky the color of bruised plums, I stood before the full-length mirror in my loft, the city lights twinkling behind me like a scattered handful of diamonds. I was wearing a simple floor-length gown of deep emerald silk. It wasn't flashy, but it was custom-made and fit me perfectly. It whispered of quiet confidence, not screaming for attention. It was the kind of dress Megan would never understand. She preferred sequins and brand names announced in bold letters. My phone chimed on the marble countertop. The family group chat, of course. It was a picture of Megan, preened and polished in a glittering gold dress that was probably very expensive and looked incredibly uncomfortable. Paul was beside her in a tuxedo, a smug look on his face. The caption from Megan read, "Off to the Oakwood Gala to support a good cause, so important to give back." A few comments from aunts followed. "You look like a movie star, and have fun, you two." Then, predictably, a message directed at me appeared. "Ashley, sweetie, are you going out tonight? I hope you're not just cooped up in that little apartment again. You should really try to get out more." I could picture her typing it, a little smirk on her face, feeling magnanimous. She was offering me advice from her pedestal of perceived success. I didn't reply. Instead, I picked up my clutch, a sleek black accessory that held my phone, my keys, and a single custom-printed business card for the Vibrant Canvas Collective. I arrived at the Oakwood Country Club 2 hours before the guests. I walked through the main entrance, not as a guest, but as the host. Carol met me in the lobby, her clipboard in hand and a headset on. "Ashley, you're here. Everything is ready for your final walkthrough." We walked into the grand ballroom together. It was breathtaking. My vision had come to life. The lighting was soft, casting shifting patterns of cobalt blue and deep violet across the walls, making it feel as if we were standing inside my digital painting, Genesis. At the entrance, a massive banner hung from the ceiling. In elegant script, it said, "The Oakwood Annual Charity Gala, proudly sponsored by the Vibrant Canvas Collective." My stomach did a little flip. "It's perfect, Carol," I breathed, my voice barely a whisper. "The projections are on a 10-minute loop, just as you specified," she said, pointing to the walls. "And the prints of your other works are displayed in the silent auction hall. They're already generating a lot of buzz among the staff." We walked over to the main stage where the auction would be held. There, on a grand easel and draped in a velvet cloth, was the centerpiece, the physical print of Genesis. It was the only one of its kind, and its presence in the room felt electric. This was the culmination of 3 years of silent, relentless work. Carol checked her list. "Oh, and I almost forgot. A Mr. Frank Acker just confirmed his press pass. He's the chief art critic for the New York Journal. He said he was personally invited by the collective. I assume that was you?" I kept my expression neutral, but my heart hammered against my ribs. "Yes, I sent him an invitation a few weeks ago." Inviting Frank Acker was a gamble. He was notoriously harsh, a purist who often looked down on digital art. But if he liked what he saw, his validation would be worth more than any amount of money. It would catapult my work and the collective into a different league. Suddenly, this night wasn't just about my family. It was about my legacy. My phone buzzed again. It was Paul. He had posted a picture of their table number in the group chat. "Table 7, right near the front, pays to be a platinum member." I smiled. I knew exactly where table 7 was. I had planned the seating chart myself. It was a good table, yes, but my table, the sponsors table, was table 1, dead center, right in front of the stage. It was currently empty, waiting for me. I thanked Carol and made my way to a private lounge she had set aside for me. I needed a moment before the guests and my family began to pour in. I thought about my grandfather Arthur and his words. If they don't see your worth, build a world where they have to pay to get in. Tonight, the price of admission wasn't just the ticket fee. It was the complete and total shattering of their perception of me. They were about to walk into my world, a place they had unknowingly dismissed and ridiculed for years. They thought they were attending a charity event. They had no idea they were the main attraction. I took a deep breath, straightened the silk of my gown, and waited. The show was about to begin. I watched from a discreet balcony overlooking the main lobby as the guests began to arrive. They were a parade of silk and diamonds, their laughter echoing off the marble floors. I saw Megan and Paul the moment they stepped out of their car. Megan had her arm linked through his, her gold dress catching the light like a trapped firefly. Paul walked with the stiff-backed posture of a man who believes he owns every room he enters. They paused for a photo, Megan tilting her head just so, a practiced smile plastered on her face. They handed their coats to an attendant and swept into the lobby. I watched as they navigated the crowd, a king and queen in their tiny, self-made kingdom. Paul would clap a man on the back, sharing a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Megan would air-kiss the cheeks of women with equally frozen smiles. They were performing, and this was their favorite stage. They walked right under the massive banner I had approved, the one that read, "Proudly sponsored by the Vibrant Canvas Collective." I saw Paul glance up at it for a fraction of a second, a flicker of disinterest in his eyes before he turned his attention back to someone he deemed more important. To him, the sponsor was just a name, a faceless entity with deep pockets. The irony was delicious. I decided it was time. I descended the small private staircase and blended into the edge of the crowd, making my way towards the silent auction hall. I knew they would end up there eventually. They loved to be seen browsing the high-ticket items, making a show of their charitable spirit. Sure enough, I saw them a few minutes later, standing near a display of expensive jewelry. I took a breath and began to walk toward them, as if by chance. "Megan? Paul? Fancy seeing you here," I said, my voice calm and even. They turned, and for a moment, surprise registered on Megan's face before she masked it with a tight, condescending smile. "Ashley, oh my gosh, I'm so surprised to see you. Did you manage to get a ticket?" Her eyes scanned my simple emerald dress, clearly trying to price it in her head and failing. "Something like that," I said vaguely. Paul gave me a curt nod, his gaze already drifting over my shoulder, searching for someone more valuable to talk to. "Good for you. Getting out," he said, his tone the same one he used for a child who had successfully tied their own shoes. "It's important to network. You never know who you might meet." He was already dismissing me. In his mind, I was here to hunt for a job or a wealthy husband. "I completely agree," I said, my smile not wavering. Megan leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Sweetie, I know these things can be expensive. If you're a little short this month, Paul and I could, help you out. We wouldn't want you putting a ticket on a credit card." It was the perfect encapsulation of their worldview. They couldn't conceive of a reality where I wasn't struggling. Their image of me was so fixed, so necessary for their own sense of superiority, that they were blind to anything that contradicted it. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the final perfect piece of evidence of their willful ignorance. I just smiled. "That's very generous of you, Megan, but I'm fine." Their attention was then drawn to the center of the room, where the main auction prize, Genesis, sat on its easel, still draped in its velvet cover. A small crowd was gathering around it. "What do you think that is?" Megan asked, crinkling her nose. "I heard the main sponsor donated some piece of digital art. Probably something a computer spit out in 5 minutes. I prefer real art, something with texture." Paul scoffed. "It's a tax write-off, that's what it is. This vibrant canvas whatever is probably some tech billionaire's wife's hobby. They throw money at these things for the PR." He adjusted his bow tie, looking bored. "Come on, let's get a drink before the speeches start." They began to walk away, having already forgotten I was there. I let them go. I stayed for a moment, looking at the covered painting. My painting. The one they had just dismissed as a 5-minute computer-generated hobby. They had no idea. None at all. The host was stepping onto the stage now, tapping the microphone. The lights in the grand ballroom began to dim. I turned and walked towards my table, table 1, right at the front. The show was about to begin. The velvet was about to be pulled away, in more ways than one. I took my seat at table 1. The table was draped in emerald green linen that matched my dress, a detail I had requested. A single white orchid sat in a slender vase at its center. From my vantage point, I could see almost everyone in the room. I could certainly see table 7, where Megan was laughing at something Paul had whispered in her ear, her diamond earrings scattering the light. They looked perfectly at ease, like they were born to be in rooms like this. The lights dimmed further, and a man in a sharp tuxedo walked onto the stage. He was the club president, a man I'd seen in photos on their social media but never met. He welcomed everyone with a series of practiced jokes before getting to the heart of the matter. He spoke about the charity, the community, and the importance of generosity. I watched Paul nod sagely at the word generosity, as if he were its sole inventor. And this year, the host boomed, his voice echoing through the ballroom, we have been blessed with an act of generosity that has shattered all previous records. Our main sponsor has not only enabled us to reach our fundraising goal before the doors even opened, but has pushed us into a new stratosphere. A polite murmur went through the crowd. I saw Paul lean over to Megan and say something. I could read his lips. Must be a new hedge fund guy. This sponsor wishes to remain mostly anonymous, the host continued, operating under the name The Vibrant Canvas Collective, a name you will all see on the banners and in your programs tonight. I risked a glance at Megan. She was idly stirring her drink, looking bored. The name meant nothing to her. Why would it? But they did not stop with their incredible $200,000 donation, the host said, and the murmur turned into a collective gasp. They have also donated our grand prize for tonight's live auction, a one-of-a-kind authenticated print of a piece that has taken the art world by storm. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Genesis. On cue, two assistants on stage pulled away the velvet cloth. The room fell silent. Genesis glowed under the spotlight. It was a maelstrom of color and light, a digital creation that looked more alive than anything else in the sterile ballroom. It depicted the birth of a star, a chaotic, beautiful explosion of nebula clouds in shades of magenta, cyan, and gold. It was my soul, rendered in pixels and light. The silence was broken by a wave of applause. I saw Frank Acker, the critic, lean forward in his seat, his eyes narrowed in concentration. He wasn't clapping. He was studying. This piece, the host explained, his voice filled with reverence, is valued at over $500,000. Another, louder gasp. I saw Paul choke on his water. His head whipped toward the stage, his eyes wide with disbelief. He was a numbers guy. That number he understood. Megan's hand was frozen halfway to her mouth, her condescending smirk gone, replaced by a slack-jawed confusion. She was looking at the art she had dismissed as a 5-minute hobby. And now, the host's voice dropped, becoming intimate, it is my distinct honor to introduce the visionary behind this incredible piece, the founder of the Vibrant Canvas Collective and the benefactor of our evening. She is a testament to the power of following one's passion, a local talent who has built a global empire from the ground up. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Ms. Ashley. My name hung in the air for a second. It didn't compute. The room was a sea of confused faces, all turning, searching. Then I stood up. The spotlight found me. It was warm and bright. Every single head in that ballroom swiveled to face me, to face table 1. But I only looked at table 7. I saw it happen in slow motion. Megan's eyes finding mine. The flicker of confusion, then denial, then a dawning horror that drained all the color from her face. Paul looked like he'd been struck by lightning. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Their entire understanding of the world, of their place in it and my place in it, was crumbling before their very eyes. I walked towards the stage. My heels clicked softly on the polished floor, the only sound in the cavernous, silent room. Each step felt deliberate, powerful. I wasn't the broke little sister anymore. I was the benefactor. I was the sponsor. I was the artist. As I passed their table, I didn't look at them, but I could feel their shock like a physical force. On stage, I shook the host's hand and turned to the microphone. I looked out at the sea of faces, finally letting my eyes rest on Megan and Paul. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady and clear. My grandfather, Arthur, wasn't a businessman, but he gave me the best advice I ever received. He told me, if they don't see your worth, build a world where they have to pay to get in. I paused, letting the words sink in. Welcome to my world. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. I simply nodded to the audience, turned, and walked back to my table as a stunned, then thunderous applause erupted around me. I sat down, picked up my water glass, and took a calm sip, never taking my eyes off my sister. The show was over. The real story was just beginning. The applause was a physical thing, a wave of sound that washed over me and created a barrier between my table and theirs. I watched them through it, my sister and her husband, frozen in the spotlight's afterglow. Megan's face was a mask of chalky white, her perfectly applied lipstick a slash of red against the pallor. Paul looked like he had swallowed a stone. His entire posture, usually so confident and expansive, had shrunk. He was staring at me, but I don't think he was seeing me. He was seeing numbers. He was seeing the $500,000 valuation, the cost of sponsoring a gala of this magnitude, the impossible math that was short-circuiting his brain. The clapping eventually died down, replaced by an excited buzz of chatter. People were looking at me, then looking at table 7, then whispering to their companions. The story was writing itself in their minds. The forgotten sister. The artistic genius. The surprise benefactor. I could feel the narrative shifting, the power in the room recalibrating and settling around me. Megan finally moved. It was a jerky, puppet-like motion. She pushed her chair back, her eyes still locked on mine. She was going to come over. I knew the playbook. She would try to laugh it off, to say something like, "Oh, Ashley, you always were so dramatic. Why didn't you tell us?" She would try to fold this new reality into her old one, to make me small again, to make this a family joke instead of a declaration of war. I braced myself, but she never made it. A man stepped into the space between our tables. He was tall and thin, with a severe haircut and glasses that seemed to magnify the intensity of his gaze. It was Frank Acker, the critic. He had a reputation for being ruthless, for ending careers with a single, devastatingly witty review. He completely ignored Megan, who stopped in her tracks as if she'd run into a glass wall. "Ms. Ashley," Frank Acker said, his voice surprisingly soft. He gestured back towards the stage, where my piece was now being carefully prepared for transport by white-gloved handlers. The use of layered digital textures to create a sense of historical decay on a purely modern medium. It's audacious. It's brilliant. I smiled, a real smile this time. "Thank you, Mr. Acker. I'm glad it spoke to you." "It shouted," he corrected. "And it said that most of what passes for art these days is just noise. You've created a signal." He looked past me, his eyes sweeping over Megan, who was now awkwardly standing by her table, and Paul, who had his phone out and was furiously tapping on the screen. Frank Acker's expression held a flicker of disdain before he turned back to me. "It's a pleasure to finally meet the person behind the work. I've been following your collective's acquisitions. Very shrewd." "I had good advice," I said, my eyes drifting back to my sister. Megan seemed to shrink under his dismissive gaze. She slowly sank back into her chair, her moment lost. The attempt to control the narrative had failed. She wasn't part of this conversation. She was on the outside. For the first time in her life, she wasn't important enough to be acknowledged. She was just a guest at my party. I spent the next hour talking to people like Frank Acker, curators from major museums, collectors who flew in from overseas, other artists I had long admired. They didn't see me as Megan's broke little sister. They saw me as the founder of the Vibrant Canvas Collective. They saw me as the artist who had just sold a piece for a staggering sum. I could feel Paul's eyes on me the entire time. Every laugh I shared, every handshake I accepted, seemed to be another nail in his coffin. When I finally returned to my table, it was nearly empty. My business manager, a sharp woman named Sandra, was waiting for me. She handed me a tablet. "It's done," Sandra said quietly, her face neutral. "The wire transfer was confirmed 10 minutes ago." On the screen was a confirmation of a transaction. It was a number with a lot of zeros. It wasn't for the art piece. It was much, much bigger. "And Paul?" I asked, keeping my voice low. Sandra's lips twitched into a small, satisfied smile. "His bank has been trying to offload that portfolio of toxic commercial real estate debt for months. They were desperate. We got it for a fraction of its face value." I looked across the room. Paul was now standing by the bar, talking animatedly into his phone. His face was flushed, and I could see a vein throbbing in his temple even from this distance. He was probably talking to his boss, trying to explain how this happened, how the very building they were standing in, a prime piece of real estate whose mortgage was part of that toxic portfolio, now effectively belonged to the sister-in-law he'd written off. My grandfather, Arthur, had said to build a world where they have to pay to get in. I had done that, but I was just getting started. Now I was going to own the land that world was built on, and they were about to be evicted. I took a sip of my water, the cool liquid a welcome contrast to the fire in my veins. The show wasn't over. It was just intermission. I watched Paul end his call with a sharp, angry tap on his phone screen. He swiped a hand over his face, a gesture I'd seen him use 1,000 times when he was trying to project calm over a simmering rage. It never worked. A tiny muscle in his jaw was twitching, a frantic little metronome counting down the seconds to his implosion. Megan was watching him too, her perfectly painted smile frozen in place. She looked like a mannequin that had just been told the store was closing. Forever. I picked up my glass of water and walked slowly toward their table. Each step felt deliberate, powerful. The sound of my heels on the polished concrete floor was the only sound in my world. As I approached, Megan's eyes snapped to me. She immediately rearranged her expression into one of bored condescension. It was her default setting when she felt threatened. "Well, look who it is," she said, her voice a little too loud. "Finally done talking to your important friends? I hope you thanked them for coming to your little thing." I ignored her. My focus was entirely on Paul. I stopped beside their table and looked down at him. He refused to meet my gaze, instead choosing to stare intently at the melting ice in his whiskey glass. "Everything all right, Paul?" I asked. My voice was soft, genuinely curious. It was the tone I used to use when I was trying to be included, to be seen as part of their world. Now, it was a weapon. He finally looked up. His eyes narrowed. "Perfectly fine, just a minor fire at work. Something you wouldn't understand. It involves numbers with more than 2 digits. I smiled. "Oh, I'm getting much better with numbers these days, especially ones with lots of zeros at the end. It's amazing what you can learn when you have the right motivation." Megan let out a brittle laugh. "Please. You probably think a 401k is a fun run. Don't bother Paul, he's dealing with real-world problems." "I know he is," I said, my smile never wavering. I leaned forward slightly, placing my free hand on the back of the empty chair at their table. "In fact, I heard there was a big portfolio sale today. Some toxic assets his bank was desperate to get rid of. Commercial real estate, I think? Sounds messy. Very real world." The color drained from Paul's face. It was fascinating to watch. It started at his hairline and washed down over his forehead, his cheeks, his neck, until he was the color of old parchment. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air. Megan looked back and forth between us, her brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about? What portfolio?" "It's nothing, Megan," Paul finally managed to say, his voice strained. "It's confidential bank business, something she couldn't possibly know anything about." "That's where you're wrong," I said, straightening up. "I know quite a bit about it. I find the whole sector fascinating. The idea that you can buy up someone's debt, their obligations, their buildings, for pennies on the dollar. It's the ultimate power move, don't you think?" I let the words hang in the air. Paul was staring at me now, a look of dawning horror on his face. The twitch in his jaw was going wild. He was connecting the dots, the art sale, the wire transfer confirmation he must have seen on Sandra's tablet, my sudden interest in his work. The pieces were clicking into place in his head, forming a picture he couldn't bear to look at. My sister Megan and her husband Paul thought I'd fail. I proved them wrong, building an empire from their doubt. What would you do if your own family tried to break you? Comment below and share. "You," he whispered. It was barely audible. "It was you, that anonymous buyer. That was your collective." I gave a small, non-committal shrug. "I've learned that it's smart to diversify. Digital art is wonderful, but real estate? It's so tangible. For instance, this building. Lovely architecture, don't you think? A prime asset. I'd hate to see it mismanaged." Megan was completely lost. "What is going on? Paul, what is she saying?" She grabbed his arm, her manicured nails digging into the sleeve of his expensive suit. "Why are you looking like that?" Paul didn't answer her. He couldn't take his eyes off me. The arrogance was gone, replaced by raw, unfiltered fear. He had built his entire identity on being the one in control, the one with the money and the power. He looked at me, his broke sister-in-law, and saw the person who now held the strings to his entire career. I owned his failure. "I should get back to my guests," I said, my voice bright and cheerful. It was lovely chatting. "Oh, and Paul? You should expect a call tomorrow morning from my business manager, Sandra. She'll be scheduling a full review of all the properties in the portfolio. We'll be making some changes, effective immediately." I turned and walked away, not looking back. I didn't need to. I could feel their eyes burning into my back. I could feel the collapse of their perfectly constructed world. The silence they left in their wake was more satisfying than any applause. The message in the family group chat had been 4 words: "She'll always be broke." I opened my phone, went to my Instagram profile with its 2 million followers, and looked at my bio. It was still there. I thought about deleting it, but then I smiled. Not yet. The show wasn't over. This was just the end of the first act. And I was going to make sure they had front row seats for the rest of it. The next morning, the air in Sandra's minimalist office felt electric. She sat behind a large oak desk, her silver hair tied back in a sleek bun. A single speakerphone sat in the center of the desk. I sat in a leather armchair opposite her, holding a warm mug of coffee, my heart beating a steady, determined rhythm. Sandra gave me a sharp, confident nod. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded back. She dialed the number. It rang 3 times before Paul picked up. "Paul Evans," he answered, his voice tight and clipped, trying to project an authority he no longer had. "Mr. Evans," Sandra said, her tone as cool and smooth as Riverstone. "This is Sandra Miller, business manager for the Artemis Collective. I'm calling as requested to discuss the portfolio acquired from your institution yesterday." I heard a faint shuffling sound on his end. "Look, I don't know what my sister-in-law thinks she's doing," he began, "but this is highly irregular. There are protocols, there are non-disclosure agreements." "We are aware of all agreements," Sandra cut in smoothly. "We've had our legal team review them. We are now the primary lien holders on all 17 properties. Per Clause 14B of the transfer agreement, we are exercising our right to an immediate operational review and management restructuring." There was a pause. I could almost picture him, his jaw twitching, his mind racing to find an angle, a loophole. "Restructuring? That's not necessary. The assets are stable." "Our preliminary analysis suggests otherwise," Sandra replied, tapping a pen on a folder in front of her. "For instance, the flagship property, the building where the gallery event was held last night. Your bank was carrying it at a valuation of $42 million. Our auditors place its current market value, given the commercial vacancies, at closer to 28. That's a significant discrepancy, Mr. Evans. One might even call it negligent." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. I could hear faint, frantic whispering. It sounded like Megan. What does she want? Paul, what does she want? As I listened to his world quietly unravel, a memory of my father surfaced. He was a quiet man, a librarian who spent his life surrounded by other people's stories. He always told me, "Emily, the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful." I sat there, silent, invisible on the call, and felt the weight of his words settle over me like a cloak. This is a misunderstanding," Paul finally stammered. His corporate armor was cracking. "If you're looking for a quick profit, we can arrange a buyback. At a premium, of course. We can make this right." "We aren't interested in a buyback," Sandra said calmly. "We are interested in competence. Effective immediately, we are installing our own management team at all properties. Your services, and the services of your associates, will no longer be required. You will receive official notice by courier within the hour." "You can't do that," he shouted, his voice finally breaking, raw with panic. "That portfolio is tied to my entire department. This will ruin me. This will ruin my career." "Perhaps you should have considered that before leveraging your career on overvalued assets," Sandra said, her voice devoid of any sympathy. "We will be in touch." She hung up the phone without waiting for a reply. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. I looked at Sandra and she gave me a small, approving smile. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. It was the family group chat. I picked it up. A wall of text from Megan had appeared. Emily, I don't know what kind of sick game you're playing, but you need to stop this right now. You're destroying our lives. Paul has worked his entire life for that bank. We have a mortgage. We have children. Have you no decency? After everything we've done for you, all the times we tried to help you, to give you advice because we were worried about you. And this is how you repay us? By trying to make us broke? You are a cruel, heartless person. Dozens of messages from aunts and uncles followed. Question marks. Shocked emojis. Messages like, Megan, what's going on? And, is this true, Emily? I read Megan's message again. Trying to make us broke. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I didn't type a reply. I closed the chat app. I opened Instagram. I scrolled to my bio, where the 4 words that started it all were still on display. She'll always be broke. I tapped on the new post button. I selected the latest piece I had finished, a swirling digital abstract of gold and deep blue, titled Due Diligence. Then I typed out a caption. It was simple. Just bought my first skyscraper. Funny how life works out. I tagged the location, the very building where I had shattered their world last night. I hit share, and then I watched as the likes and comments started pouring in, a digital tide rising against their crumbling shore. My phone didn't just buzz. It became a vibrating slab of glass and metal, skittering across the polished concrete floor of my new studio. The Instagram post was less than a minute old, and it was already a supernova. The likes were climbing in a frantic, unreadable blur. My follower count, which had just crossed the 2 million mark a week ago, was jumping by the 1,000. Comments flooded in. Fire emojis, clapping hands, rocket ships. A few blue-check artists I had admired for years wrote things like "Queen moves," and "This is how it's done." It was a wave of validation from a world that understood my language, the language of creation and success built from nothing. Then, a different notification cut through the noise. The family group chat. It was like a siren wailing from a distant, burning world I had already escaped. Megan's first message was pure disbelief. "What skyscraper? What are you talking about, Emily? That's not funny. Stop making things up for attention." An aunt chimed in. "Is this a joke, dear? A piece of art, maybe?" I didn't reply. I just watched. My post had automatically shared to other platforms, and I knew one of them would see it. It took about 90 seconds. Megan's tone shifted violently. "I just saw it. You tagged the building. Paul's building. What did you do? What is this money, Emily? You can't have this kind of money. You must have done something illegal. You're trying to frame us." Paul's father, a man who only ever posted blurry photos of his garden gnomes, wrote, "Paul? Son? What is she talking about?" The chaos was beautiful in its predictability. They couldn't comprehend a reality where I succeeded on my own terms. In their world, success was a ladder you climbed within a system Paul was a master of. My success was alien, and therefore it had to be corrupt. It was the only way their worldview could remain intact. I felt a strange calm, the same calm I felt when finishing a difficult piece. I had placed every color, every line, exactly where it needed to go. Now I was just watching the composition settle. A new notification appeared at the top of my screen, separate from the group chat. A private message. It was from Paul. "Delete it. Delete it right now, Emily. You think this is a game? You are playing with things you don't understand. This isn't just my career, it's my reputation, it's your sister's home. It's for your nieces. Do you want them to have nothing because of your petty jealousy?" I read his words. Petty jealousy. He still thought I wanted what they had. The granite countertops, the golf club membership, the approval of people I didn't respect. He couldn't see that I had never been jealous of their life. I had only been hurt by their disdain for mine. His mention of my nieces was a low blow, but an ineffective one. I thought of them, 2 little girls being taught that value was measured in brand names and square footage. Maybe seeing their world upended would be the best education they could ever receive. An education in resilience. An education in the fact that the artsy one could buy the castle. I didn't reply to him either. Silence was my medium now. My father's voice echoed in my mind, not as a memory of grief, but as a strategic guide. Emily, the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. They were all shouting into the void, and I was the void, quiet, expanding, and pulling everything into my orbit. My work phone, the one I used for business, rang. It was Sandra. Her voice was crisp, professional, but I could hear the hint of amusement in it. "The post was a nice touch, Emily. Very effective," she said. "It seems to have flushed them out. I'm calling with an update. Our acquisition of the bank's non-performing loan portfolio was finalized an hour ago. As it happens, your brother-in-law's personal mortgage was part of that package." I sat up straighter. I had asked Sandra to look into their finances, but I didn't expect it to be this seamless. "Paul Evans and Megan Evans have leveraged their home to its absolute limit," Sandra continued, the sound of papers shuffling faintly in the background. "They have 3 separate mortgages on the property, all bundled into high-risk derivatives that the bank was happy to offload. The primary loan agreement has a clause, tied directly to his employment and bonus structure at the bank. Given his termination this afternoon, the loan is now in default." I held my breath. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," Sandra said, and I could now clearly hear the smile in her voice, "that the 5-bedroom house in the Greenwood gated community is now our asset. We are the bank, and we are calling in the debt. The eviction notice will be delivered tomorrow morning." A shaky laugh escaped my lips. It wasn't just his career. It was the entire facade. The house was the stage where they performed their success. And I had just bought the theater. "Thank you, Sandra," I said, my voice steady. "My pleasure," she replied. "Enjoy your evening." I ended the call and looked back at my personal phone. The group chat was a frantic mess of accusations and questions. I scrolled past all of it, past Megan's rage and Paul's father's confusion. I tapped out a new message, my thumb moving with deliberate calm. It was the same phrase from my Instagram post, the one that summed up everything. "Funny how life works out." I hit send, and for the first time, the family group chat fell completely silent. I stared at the screen, at the empty space where a storm of angry messages should have been. The silence from the group chat was louder than any of their insults had ever been. It was the sound of a power dynamic shifting, a tectonic plate grinding into a new position after centuries of stillness. The 4 words Megan had typed years ago, "She'll always be broke," had been a verdict. My final message, "Funny how life works out," was an execution. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about that 5-bedroom house, the one I'd only visited twice. Once for a housewarming party where Paul gave a half-hour speech about his stock portfolio, and once for a Christmas where my handmade gift to Megan was politely placed on a side table and never mentioned again. The house wasn't just a building. It was their fortress of superiority, the physical proof that their choices were right, and mine were a joke. The next morning, I did something I hadn't planned. I got in my car, a simple but reliable sedan I'd bought with cash, and I drove to Greenwood. I didn't speed. I stopped for coffee. I felt a strange calm settle over me as I navigated the winding roads of the suburbs, a world so alien to my downtown loft. I parked on a street overlooking the entrance to their gated community, far enough away not to be noticed. I just wanted to see. I needed to see. At exactly 9:15 a.m., a plain white van from a legal courier service pulled up to the gate. The driver spoke into the intercom, and after a moment, the ornate iron gates swung open. I watched the van disappear down the perfectly paved road lined with manicured trees. I pictured it pulling into their cobblestone driveway right next to Megan's white Range Rover and Paul's black BMW. I imagined the courier, a man in a simple uniform, ringing the doorbell. I imagined Megan answering, probably in her $1,000 yoga outfit, annoyed at the interruption to her morning routine. I could see her face, the polite smile turning to confusion, then to disbelief, then to pure, unadulterated horror as she read the legal document with its bold official letterhead. The eviction notice. The words that would tell her that her fortress was built on sand, and the tide, my tide, was coming in. I waited. About 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It wasn't the group chat. It was a direct call from a number I knew by heart, but hadn't spoken to in months. My mother, Helen. I let it ring 3 times before answering, taking a deep breath. "Hello, Mom," I said, my voice even. Emily, what is happening? What did you do? Her voice was a frantic whisper laced with panic. Megan just called me. She was screaming. Something about the house, about being evicted? This has to be a mistake. Paul is going to fix it, right? I listened to her string of panicked questions. She wasn't asking what they did to me. She was asking what I did to them. The default setting for my family was that I was always the problem to be solved. It's not a mistake, Mom, I said calmly. Paul can't fix it. He doesn't work at the bank anymore. I told you I was investing, remember? Well, I invested in their debt. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her trying to process the information, trying to fit it into the neat little box where Megan was the successful one and I was the charity case. Invested in their debt? What does that even mean? She stammered. Emily, this is their home. Your sister's home. You can't just take it away. This isn't you. This is cruel. Was it cruel when Megan sent that message? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Was it cruel when Paul lectured me for an hour about my hobby in front of the entire family? Was it cruel when you all stood by and said nothing, ever? You called it Paul being Paul, and Megan being competitive. You never called it cruel. That was different, she said weakly. That was just family teasing. No, Mom, I said, watching the white courier van drive back out of the gates in my rearview mirror. Its job was done. That was the foundation. This is just the house that was built on it. And the foundation was rotten. She started to cry then, soft, helpless sobs. But what are they going to do? Where will they go? I don't know, I answered honestly. I guess they'll have to figure that out. Like I did when I was eating instant noodles in my studio apartment, reading messages about how I'd always be broke. I ended the call before she could reply. I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel triumphant. Not really. I just felt clear. The fog of guilt and obligation that had clouded my life for so long was finally burning away. I put my car in drive and pulled away from the curb, not looking back at the iron gates. I had seen what I needed to see, the first crack in their perfect facade. And I knew it was just the beginning. The cars, the club memberships, the entire life they had built to mock me. It was all tied to the same rotten foundation. And I was ready to bring all of it down. The silence after I hung up on my mother was heavy, but clean. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was breathing pure oxygen, with none of the toxic fumes of family expectation and quiet disappointment. I drove away from the gated community, the iron bars shrinking in my rearview mirror until they were just a black line against the perfect green lawns. My next stop wasn't my apartment. It was a chic little French bistro with outdoor seating directly across the street from the glass and steel tower where Paul worked. I ordered a mimosa, even though it was 3 p.m, and sat there, watching the entrance to his bank. I knew his schedule. He always took a late lunch, striding out around this time like he owned the sidewalk. It took less than an hour. A large, slightly rusted flatbed tow truck rumbled down the street, its yellow lights flashing. It pulled up right in front of the valet stand. 2 men in greasy overalls got out. They didn't bother speaking to the valet. One of them slapped a bright yellow boot on the front wheel of a gleaming black Porsche 911 parked in the reserved for senior VP spot. My brother-in-law's pride and joy. His I've made it trophy. I took a slow sip of my mimosa as Paul burst through the building's revolving doors, his face a mask of fury. He was waving his hands, his voice carrying across the street in angry, indistinct syllables. He was trying to pull rank, to intimidate them with his $5,000 suit and his title. The tow truck driver just shook his head, pointed to a piece of paper on his clipboard, and started hooking the car up. Paul's shoulders slumped. The corporate titan looked like a child whose favorite toy was being taken away. The car was lifted onto the flatbed, and as it drove away, I saw Paul just standing there on the curb, utterly defeated. My phone buzzed. It was Megan. I let it go to voicemail. It buzzed again, and again. On the 5th try, I answered. "What do you want, Megan?" I asked, my voice cool. "The car, Emily! They took Paul's car, from his work! Everyone saw!" She was shrieking, her voice cracking with hysteria. "What is this? What are you doing to us?" "I'm not doing anything," I said calmly. "I'm just a collector of assets. And it seems you and Paul have a lot of assets that are, shall we say, overleveraged. I used his own corporate language against him. If you want to have a civil conversation, you can come to my studio. I gave her the address, a prime location in the city's newly revitalized arts district. They arrived 45 minutes later. They must have taken a taxi, a thought that brought a small, cold smile to my face. I watched from my floor-to-ceiling windows as they got out. Megan's perfect hair was a mess and Paul's suit jacket was wrinkled. They looked lost as they stepped into the lobby of my building. When they were buzzed up to my floor, the elevator doors opened onto my studio, a sprawling 3,000-square-foot space with polished concrete floors and walls adorned with my vibrant, large-scale digital prints. It was more gallery than workspace. It was a monument to the success they said I'd never have. Megan stopped dead, her mouth falling open. She stared at a massive piece on the far wall, a swirling nebula of color that had recently sold to a tech billionaire for a six-figure sum. Paul's eyes darted around, calculating the value of the space, the equipment, the art. I could see the gears turning in his head, failing to compute. This is yours? Megan whispered, gesturing vaguely at everything. It is, I said, sitting behind a massive glass desk. Funny what you can afford when you're always broke. This is a predatory financial attack, Emily, Paul blustered, finding his voice. Buying up secured debt and consolidating it for a hostile takeover of personal assets? It's unethical. Is it more unethical than telling your wife's sister she's a worthless failure in front of her entire family? I countered. Is it more unethical than building a life on lies and debt just to feel superior to someone else? You talked to me about 401ks and market volatility. Well, I learned my lessons. I diversified. My portfolio is quite robust now. Our home, our car, our friends. Megan was crying now. You're ruining our life. Your life was an illusion, I said, my voice cutting through her sobs. I leaned forward. My father always told me a house built on a rotten foundation cannot stand. Your life, your cars, your club, it's all part of the same building. And the foundation was rotten. Paul scoffed, a flicker of his old arrogance returning. This is a temporary setback. I'm a senior vice president. I'll get another position, a better one. We'll recover from this. Will you? I asked softly. I reached into a drawer and pulled out a single thin folder. I slid it across the glass desk towards him. I don't think you will. He opened it cautiously. Inside was a single document. It was an internal bank audit report from 6 months ago, detailing creative accounting practices and misappropriation of client funds directly linked to his department. His face went white as a sheet. The bank didn't fire you because of downsizing, Paul, I said quietly. They let you resign to avoid a scandal, but they kept the evidence, and I bought the firm that did their internal security. I own the report, and I haven't decided what to do with it yet. The silence in the room was a physical thing. It was heavier than the glass desk between us, heavier than the concrete floors. Paul's hand, the one holding the audit report, was trembling so violently the paper rattled. His face, usually a mask of smug confidence, had collapsed into a mess of gray, slack-jawed fear. He looked old. What is it? Megan asked, her voice thin and reedy. Paul, what is that? He couldn't answer. His eyes were locked on mine, wide with a terror that was almost primal. He wasn't a senior vice president anymore. He was just a man who had been caught. It's an insurance policy, I said, my voice calm and even. The kind you recommended I get, Paul. A protection against market volatility. I let the words hang in the air. It seems your former colleagues at the bank were very thorough. They documented everything. Every transfer, every fake account, every client fund you creatively moved around to boost your department's numbers and, of course, your own bonus. Paul finally tore his eyes away from me and looked at the paper again, as if hoping the words would change. This can't... How did you... I told you, I said, leaning back in my chair. I diversified. My art is my main business, but I have other investments. Tech startups, real estate, a few private equity ventures. One of those ventures happens to own a majority stake in the cybersecurity firm that your bank hired to handle its internal security archives. All it took was a phone call. Megan started to sob again, a raw, ugly sound that echoed in the cavernous studio. Emily, please, you can't. This will destroy him. It will destroy us. It's already done, I said, my voice devoid of pity. The destruction happened the day he decided he was smarter than everyone else. The day you decided that kindness was a weakness and that my dreams were something to be mocked in a family group chat. Paul finally found a sliver of his old self. He straightened his wrinkled jacket, trying to muster some dignity. All right, Emily, what do you want? A settlement? We can work out a payment plan. We can find a synergistic solution to de-escalate this situation. I almost laughed. Even at the end of the world, he spoke like a corporate memo. A synergistic solution? Paul, you still don't get it. This isn't a negotiation. There is no deal to be made here. You're not my peer. You're a liability on my balance sheet, and I'm closing it out. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the glittering Detroit skyline. The city was alive, pulsing with energy, with reinvention. Just like me. That report, I said, pointing back at the desk without looking at them, is being couriered to the chairman of the board tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., not to the police. That would be too messy. I'm sending it to the people whose reputations you put at risk. They will, in the interest of self-preservation, hand it over to the federal authorities themselves. It's cleaner that way. More professional. You'd appreciate that. Megan was on her feet now, her face streaked with mascara. No, Emily, we're sisters. You can't do this to your own family. I turned to face her. Family? Is that what we are, Megan? Family doesn't send a 4-word text message that's designed to break someone's spirit. Family doesn't stand by and applaud while their husband belittles their sister's life choices. You built a house of cards on a foundation of debt and arrogance, just so you could look down on me from your imaginary throne. I took a step closer. As my father always said, a house built on a rotten foundation cannot stand. Your house just fell. I pressed a button on my desk. My security will see you out. They didn't move for a moment, just stared at me as if I were a stranger. And maybe I was. I wasn't the artsy one anymore. I wasn't the family project. I was the one holding all the cards. 2 large men in discreet suits appeared at the elevator. They didn't touch Megan or Paul, but their presence was a clear, final statement. They were escorted out, 2 small broken figures swallowed by the gleaming lobby of my success. 2 days later, I was sketching on my tablet when a news alert popped up on my screen. Financial giant rocked by fraud scandal. Former senior VP Paul under federal investigation. I read the first paragraph. It mentioned misappropriation of funds and a thorough internal audit. I didn't feel a rush of victory. I didn't feel glee. I just felt quiet. The closing of a long, painful chapter. That evening, I opened my Instagram profile. 2 million followers. I looked at my bio, at the 4 words that had been my armor and my fuel for so long. She'll always be broke. My finger hovered over the screen. I thought about Megan, about Paul, about the years of feeling small. And then I deleted it, letter by letter, until it was gone. In its place, I typed a single word. Emily. It was enough. From a tiny studio to the top, I faced down betrayal. He's now facing fraud charges, my empire stands, and my bio is finally just Emily. What did you think of my journey? Subscribe for more stories of triumph.